what you have to understand, Tyrone, is that the FBI's objective is to be effective. It's not to be right. It's not to be just. It's not to be moral. Nowhere in our edict does it say that. We have to be effective. And if COINTELPRO was effective in destroying the Black Panther Party and destroying black organizations in the 1960s, why in the world would we end it in the 1990s? Why would we end it if it was effective? And our mission is to be effective. Nowhere do we talk about seeking justice. That's for the prosecutor's office. We talk about being effective. And I think that's significant because getting people to understand today why that program continues, that there's no period in time where the FBI decided to change their direction and not make it effective. Getting people to understand that is the most difficult thing. Even as we see black politicians all over this country being investigated, being set up, when we see what's happening in urban America, we've kind of lived in episodes and we haven't connected to that. COINTELPRO has a powerful legacy, but it's not only a legacy, it's what we're seeing and what's going on now, but it can be, which is the good news, it can be effectively countered. As when I went in the FBI Academy and they brought us into those quiet training rooms, one of the things they said to us was that you will never effectively counter that which you do not fully understand. You can yell at it and scream at it, but you will not effectively counter it until you know every single aspect of it. And so we've been advocating getting it into elementary school and middle school. And I'll say this and shut down and go with your questions. I mentioned to you I think I mentioned this to you before. I was in New York giving a presentation at a school there, and some of the older people in the audience stood up, and I was explaining COINTELPRO, and they said, yeah, but we already know about that. And there was a young man on the front row, and I will never forget this, who stood up and said, yeah, you know about it, but we don't know about it. We don't even know what the acronym COINTELPRO stands for. It's not a class on a historically black college or university. There's a class for the Holocaust, but there's no class for COINTELPRO. There's no one explaining it to us in elementary, middle, and high school, so we will know what it looked like, when we'll be tricked and trapped, and what the trappers look like. You know about it, but we don't know about it. You've made it an aspect of history. In reality, it continues even until today.
There is a place picking up on much of what you said, and in the modern context where the 80s and the 90s are concerned, I want you to walk us a bit further down that path, especially based on that conversation that you shared with us and that you mentioned to us last time. And that is that when we are talking about COINTELPRO program and this issue of the word you use, neutralize groups. So we're talking about groups. The Black Panthers, I think there are certainly brothers and sisters who've seen enough footage, let's say. Maybe they weren't even living in the era, but they've got some sense that, yeah, the government was, dealing with the Panthers, and they see the Panthers generally in their minds, with guns, etc. So there's kind of like the black community in and out. And, well, there was something in it. But it wasn't just the Black Panther Party. It was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. You pointed out it was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. It was the NAACP. You shared with us in one conversation that essentially the Bureau didn't care what the objectives were of the organization. They simply wanted to make sure that they had control through infiltration.
No doubt about it. And I want to emphasize that this is not secondhand knowledge. What being a part of the FBI, and as I mentioned in the book, my brothers wasn't for me joining, and they thought I would become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. In hindsight, it may have been divine intervention, but it certainly was a good thing that I was there, because from first-hand knowledge, from going into the secret file rooms and having access to that, even after the cases on my desk was finished for that day, staying around late into the night to 2 and 3 in the morning, reading these files firsthand. Because you got to remember, even if some want to justify what the FBI did to the Black Panther Party for self-defense, you have to remember that the FBI poisoned the food. This is not hypothetical. Poisoned the food for the Breakfast for Children program, hoping that the mothers of the children would turn on the Black Panther Party because their children were being sick. This is not how you neutralize people who you would think are being violent towards the government. They were poisoning children. They did background investigations on any parent that sent their children to any of the programs, whether they were free health clinics or whether they were education programs, any of the clinics or programs that the Black Panther Party housed to help people in the community. It had nothing to do with guns and confronting the police. I'm talking about free health clinics to deal with some of the diseases that have become so prevalent in our community today, which would not have become prevalent had these programs continued. The FBI disrupted those programs, fired people, foreclosed on people's homes who were teaching in those programs, went at the teachers who were helping young people. These were all programs dealt with what they consider today crime abatement, reducing violence in the community. All these programs were put in place by organizations such as the Nation of Islam and the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The full name is important.
That's right. It's very important, brother. You're right.
It's a multifaceted area.
That's right. That's right.
And they infiltrated these organizations. So the result of what we're seeing today, and what is being called a lawlessness, and grown folks saying, I don't understand what's happening with our children. If we could connect the dots, and that's why it's so important for us to continue to teach COINTELPRO. It has to be a part of the curriculum for black children, because if not, they cannot connect the dots. I mean, like I said, the agency for which I work told us that we can't effectively counter that which we do not fully understand. So if we don't understand this, we'll never be able to abate the violence. We'll never be able to properly educate our young people so they understand the tricks and traps of the trappers. I was giving a presentation out in California to some members of the Crips and the Bloods, and I was explaining them some basic logic that every phone call they make have to go through a satellite manned by the FCC and controlled by the FBI. So you can't hook up with your boy across town without calling the FBI. The FBI has to hook you up. Whatever drug transaction you make, whatever murder for hire you set up, you have to call the satellite, because we don't control any satellites, and that's what we did. We had cloned pages and cloned phones, and the phones became monitoring devices. You can't turn on a cell phone now that doesn't, you can turn it off and throw it in the back seat of your car, and through technology, the FBI can turn it on and monitor your conversation in your car, even though you turned the cell phone off. So I was explaining to them that everything they do is not, they're not out-slicking the system. The system is allowing them to get away with it, but for so far, and then when they're ready to go get them, they go get them. These are the kind of things when we taught these young men this out in California, they begin to say, yeah, you know what, we're not out-slicking the system. Somebody wants us to do this, but it has to be taught early and often, and that's the legacy of COINTELPRO. We've neglected telling this story. Black politicians who I work with in Chicago, I was brought in there by Brother Munir Muhammad and Crow, the Coalition for the Remembrance of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, to talk to some of the aldermen who were caught up in FBI investigations, who have been caught in traps. And when I sat down with them, I said, you're meeting with people who you don't know. They've got cameras in their apartments. They're coming into your neighborhoods. Jeremiah Wright's church was the scene of an FBI undercover operation. Jeremiah Wright in Chicago didn't even know what was going on, but they was using his lot to set up black politicians.
Well, but this is the Trinity Baptist, Trinity Church you're talking about, right?
Absolutely. They were using his lot to set up politicians to get them to pay off construction people. So they were doing some work. They weren't even doing any work at the church. So when I sat down with the aldermen, and some of them were up in age, and I said to them, don't you remember COINTELPRO? Aren't you the ones who talk about this program? Well, how can you not put things in place where you're not meeting with anybody you don't know? You put people on your staff to investigate this. The person on your staff with some kind of background in policing or security or a former FBI agent or something like that who you have some trust in, who can tell you, don't meet with this person, because that is as important to keep you in power, so you can empower our community as anything else you do. Because once you are compromised, and once they start saying we have this tape on you or we have this information on you, then the decisions you make from that point on are no longer for our community, they are for to keep you out of prison. So